The morning air was cool as Thomas walked through the iron gates of Oak Ridge Cemetery. In his hands, he carried a small bouquet of white lilies, his mother's favorite. The gravel path crunched beneath his feet as he made his way to the eastern section where she had been laid to rest exactly 3 years ago today. Thomas visited every month without fail, but anniversary days were different. They carried a weight that made his steps heavier, his throat tighter. He missed her laugh the most, the way it would bubble up from deep inside her and fill any room with warmth. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," called the groundskeeper, an older gentleman, who recognized the regular visitors. "Beautiful day for remembering." Thomas nodded and raised a hand in greeting but didn't stop to chat. He needed this time alone with her even if she was gone. Margaret Hayes's headstone was simple gray granite, just as she'd requested. "No fuss," she'd told Thomas during one of their final conversations in the hospital. "Just something solid that'll last." That was his mother all over, practical, dependable, thinking of the long term even when facing the end. He knelt on the grass, setting down his small backpack. From it, he pulled out a cloth and a small bottle of water. Every visit began the same way, cleaning her stone, making sure the letters of her name remained clear and legible. "Margaret Hayes, beloved mother and healer," it read. She'd been a nurse for 40 years, delivering hundreds of babies and caring for countless families in their small town. "Hey, Mom," Thomas said softly, running the damp cloth along the top of the headstone. 3 years today, hard to believe. He worked in silence for a few minutes, telling her about his week as he cleaned, the promotion at work, his neighbor's noisy new puppy, the leak in his kitchen that he'd finally fixed himself. She would have been proud of that. She was always trying to teach him to be self-sufficient. "Dad called yesterday," he continued. "He and Diane are thinking about moving to Arizona. His arthritis is getting worse, and they think the dry heat might help." The wind rustled through the nearby oak trees, creating a gentle whisper that Thomas had come to find comforting during these visits. He was just about to open the small container of lunch he'd packed, another ritual, sharing a meal with her, as they'd done so often in life, when he heard something unusual. At first he thought it was a cat, perhaps stuck somewhere nearby. He paused, tilting his head to listen. There it was again, a small, mewling sound coming from behind his mother's headstone. "Hello?" Thomas called out, rising to his feet. The sound came again, weaker this time. Definitely not a cat. It sounded almost like... Thomas stepped around the grave marker, his heart suddenly pounding. There, partially hidden by a small bush that had been planted near his mother's grave, was a bundle wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. "Oh my God," he whispered, dropping to his knees. Inside the blanket was a tiny baby, its face red from crying, little fists waving weakly in the air. The infant couldn't have been more than a few days old, still with that newborn wrinkled look, impossibly small fingernails, and wisps of dark hair plastered to its head. Thomas's hands hovered above the baby, afraid to touch it, afraid it might not be real. Hey, it's okay," he said automatically, though his mind was racing with panic. "It's okay, little one." The baby's cries subsided slightly at the sound of his voice. With trembling hands, Thomas carefully picked up the bundle, cradling it against his chest the way his mother had once taught him to hold his cousin's newborn. The blanket was damp with morning dew, and the baby felt cold to the touch. "How long have you been out here?" he murmured, pulling the blanket away slightly to check if the child was injured. It was then that he noticed a folded piece of paper tucked into the blanket's folds. Balancing the baby in one arm, something that felt both terrifying and strangely natural, he used his free hand to unfold the note. The handwriting was shaky, written in blue ink that had smudged in places, possibly from tears. "She belongs with Margaret Hayes' family. Please take care of her." "I can't." Thomas read the words 3 times, trying to make sense of them. Someone had deliberately left this baby at his mother's grave. Someone who knew his mother, knew this was where she was buried. "She belongs with Margaret Hayes' family." The baby whimpered again, a sound that cut straight through Thomas's confusion and triggered something primal. He needed to get this child. Warm, fed, checked by a doctor. With one hand, he fumbled for his phone, nearly dropping it in his haste. He dialed 911, his eyes never leaving the tiny face now turning toward the warmth of his chest. What's your emergency? I'm at Oak Ridge Cemetery, Thomas stammered. I found a baby. Someone left a baby at my mother's grave. A baby? The dispatcher's voice sharpened with concern. Is the infant breathing? Is it conscious? Yes, she's alive. She's crying a little. But she feels cold, and I don't know how long she's been out here. The note... He stopped, realizing how strange it would sound. There's a note saying she belongs with my family. With my mom's family. But my mom died 3 years ago today. The dispatcher's calm voice guided him through checking the baby for obvious signs of distress while promising that paramedics were on their way. Thomas found himself gently rocking back and forth, an instinctive motion to comfort the small life in his arms. I don't understand, he told the dispatcher. Why would someone leave her here at a cemetery? Sir, the police will want to ask you some questions when they arrive. For now, just keep the baby warm and calm. Can you do that? Yes, Thomas said, pulling off his jacket one-handed and wrapping it around the yellow blanket for extra warmth. Yes, I can do that. As he waited, he found himself looking down at his mother's headstone. Mom, he whispered, what is this? What am I supposed to do? The baby's eyes fluttered open briefly, dark blue, unfocused, new to the world. One tiny hand escaped the blanket and reflexively gripped Thomas's finger when he touched her palm. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Thomas knew his quiet life had just been upended in ways he couldn't begin to understand. But in that moment, with a strange baby holding his finger with surprising strength, he felt an unexpected wave of protectiveness wash over him. It's going to be okay, he told the baby, though he had no idea if that was true. We're going to figure this out. The groundskeeper came running toward him, followed by 2 police officers who had arrived before the ambulance. Their voices seemed distant to Thomas, who couldn't take his eyes off the infant's face. Sir, can you tell us what happened? One officer asked, kneeling beside him. Thomas nodded, finally looking up. Someone left her here, at my mother's grave. The note says she belongs with us. He swallowed hard. But I've never seen this baby before in my life. I don't understand who would do this or why. May I see the note, sir? The second officer asked gently. Thomas carefully handed it over, still cradling the baby. My mother was a nurse, he said, as if that might explain something. She helped a lot of people over the years, but she died 3 years ago today. The wail of the ambulance grew louder, then cut off as it arrived at the cemetery gates. Thomas could see paramedics running toward them with equipment. 3 days, the groundskeeper suddenly said. Everyone turned to look at him. What? Thomas asked. That bundle, the old man said, pointing to the baby. It's been there 3 days. I noticed something by that grave earlier this week, but I thought it was just more flowers. People are always leaving things at graves. Stuffed animals, letters, all sorts of items. I didn't look closely. His face had gone pale. My God, that poor little thing has been out here for 3 days. Thomas felt his blood run cold. 3 days. This helpless newborn had been lying next to his mother's grave for 3 days, through nights that had dipped into the low 50s, through a brief rain shower yesterday. How is she even still alive? He whispered. The paramedics reached them then, immediately checking the baby's vital signs and wrapping her in special thermal blankets. They asked Thomas questions he couldn't answer. How old was she? Had she been fed? Were there any medical issues they should know about? I just found her, he kept saying. I don't know anything about her. As they prepared to transport the baby to the hospital, one of the paramedics turned to Thomas. You did good, she said, keeping her warm, staying calm. You probably saved her life. Thomas nodded numbly, watching as they carried the tiny bundle toward the ambulance. The police officers were still there, one taking notes, the other speaking into his radio. Mr. Hayes, we'll need you to come to the station to make a formal statement, the first officer said. I want to go to the hospital. Thomas replied, surprising himself. "I want to make sure she's okay." The officer studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "We can take your statement there. This is a very unusual situation." As Thomas gathered his belongings, his eyes fell once more on his mother's headstone. "Someone left a newborn baby on his late mother's grave for 3 days," he said quietly. To himself, the bizarre reality of it all finally sinking in. And somehow, in the midst of his confusion and shock, he couldn't shake the feeling that his mother would have known exactly what to do. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General Hospital buzzed overhead as Thomas sat in the waiting room, his leg bouncing nervously. He'd followed the ambulance here, immediately after giving a brief statement to the officers at the cemetery. Now, almost 2 hours later, he was still waiting for news about the baby. Officer Reyes, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, sat beside him, occasionally making notes in her small notebook. She'd been patient with him as he'd recounted the morning's events for the 3rd time, still trying to process it himself. "And you have no idea who might have left the infant at your mother's grave?" she asked again. Thomas ran his hands through his hair. "None. I mean, my mom was a nurse for decades. She helped hundreds of families. She worked in the maternity ward for most of her career." "Was she particularly close with any patients? Anyone who might have remembered her even after her passing?" Thomas sighed. "She never talked much about specific patients, confidentiality and all that. But people in town loved her. She'd sometimes get cards or small gifts from families she'd helped years later." He paused, thinking. "Sometimes I'd go grocery shopping with her, and people would stop to thank her for being there when their children were born." Officer Reyes nodded, writing something down. "We'll need a list of your family members, close friends, anyone who might have a connection that could explain this." "Of course," Thomas agreed, though he couldn't imagine anyone he knew being responsible for abandoning a newborn like that. The doors to the pediatric wing swung open, and a doctor in light blue scrubs approached them. Thomas stood immediately. "Mr. Hayes?" The doctor extended her hand. "I'm Dr. Chen. I've been examining the baby girl you found." "Is she okay?" Thomas asked, shaking the doctor's hand. Dr. Chen's expression was serious but not grim. "Considering what she's been through, she's remarkably resilient. She's suffering from mild hypothermia and dehydration, but we've got her temperature up and started IV fluids. She weighs 6 pounds, 4 ounces, and appears to be approximately 4 to 5 days old." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "So she was likely only a day or 2 old when someone left her there." "That would be my assessment, yes," Dr. Chen nodded. "We've done a full examination, and aside from the issues caused by exposure, she appears to be a healthy newborn. No birth defects or obvious health concerns." Officer Reyes stepped forward. "Doctor, is there any evidence the birth happened in a hospital? Any ID bracelets, hospital tags, anything like that?" "None," Dr. Chen replied. "The umbilical cord was cut cleanly, but not with hospital clamps. My guess would be a home birth, but not necessarily an unassisted one. Someone knew what they were doing." Thomas felt overwhelmed by it all. Can I see her?" Dr. Chen hesitated, glancing at Officer Reyes, who gave a slight nod. Briefly, the doctor agreed. "She's in the NICU for monitoring, but she's stable." Thomas followed Dr. Chen through the double doors and down a corridor. After washing his hands thoroughly and putting on a gown, he was led into the neonatal intensive care unit, where tiny babies in incubators were being monitored by nurses and machines. In the corner was a clear plastic bassinet with a small bundle inside, wrapped in a fresh hospital blanket. A nurse stood nearby, checking the IV that ran into the baby's impossibly small arm. "Here she is," Dr. Chen said softly. Thomas approached slowly, almost afraid to look. In the bright hospital lights, he could see the baby clearly for the first time. Her skin was no longer the alarming reddish blue it had been at the cemetery, but a healthy pink. Dark wisps of hair curled against her head, and her face was peaceful in sleep. "She's so small," he whispered. "Actually, she's a good size for a newborn," the nurse commented with a smile. "And she's a fighter. Her blood sugar was dangerously low when she came in, but she's responding well to treatment. Thomas stared at the sleeping infant, trying to make sense of the strange connection he now felt to her, this tiny person who had been left at his mother's grave, with a note claiming she belonged with them. "What's going to happen to her?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the baby. Dr. Chen sighed. "Once she's medically stable, which should be in a day or two if she continues to improve, social services will take over. They'll place her in emergency foster care while the police investigate and try to locate her mother." The thought of this helpless baby being handed off to strangers made Thomas's chest ache in a way he hadn't expected. "Mr. Hayes," Officer Reyes said from the doorway where she'd been observing, "we'll need to collect a DNA sample from you." Thomas turned, surprised. "From me? Why?" "Standard procedure in abandoned baby cases. We need to rule out." She paused delicately. "Well, we need to determine if there's any biological relationship that might explain why the baby was left specifically at your mother's grave." "You think she might be my child?" Thomas's voice rose in disbelief. "That's impossible. I haven't been in any relationship that could have resulted in a baby. Not in years." "It's just protocol," Officer Reyes assured him. "We'll also run the DNA through our database to see if there are any matches to open cases or missing persons." Thomas nodded numbly, looking back at the sleeping infant. "Of course. Whatever helps figure this out." Back in the waiting room, a nurse swabbed the inside of Thomas's cheek for DNA while Officer Reyes continued her questioning. "Does the name Lisa Winters mean anything to you?" Thomas thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I don't think so. Should it? We found a partial fingerprint on the note that was left with the baby. It matched a woman named Lisa Winters in our system from a teaching certification background check 3 years ago. No criminal record, nothing that would explain this situation." "My mother might have known her," Thomas suggested. "Have you found this woman?" "Lisa?" Officer Reyes frowned. "That's the thing. According to our records, Lisa Winters died 2 years ago in a car accident." Thomas stared at her, bewildered. "So it couldn't have been her who left the baby?" "No, but there could be a connection we're missing. The fingerprint was partial, so there's a chance it's a false match." As they continued talking, a tall woman in a crisp blazer approached them. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Vanessa Wilson from Child Protective Services." She had a kind face that contrasted with her formal attire. "I understand you're the one who found the baby." Thomas nodded, shaking her hand. "Yes, at my mother's grave this morning." "That's quite unusual," she commented, sitting down across from him. "In most abandonment cases, babies are left at hospitals, fire stations, or churches, places where they'll be found quickly." "The groundskeeper said she'd been there for 3 days," Thomas said, his voice tight. 3 days in the open, in a cemetery." Ms. Wilson's professional demeanor cracked slightly, her eyes reflecting sadness. "Yes, that's particularly concerning. It suggests the mother may have been in a severe state of distress or not thinking clearly, or that she wanted my family specifically to find her," Thomas added, remembering the note. "That's why I'm here," Ms. Wilson explained. "I need to understand if there's any reason someone would believe your family should take custody of this child. Do you have any siblings who might have recently been pregnant or had a partner who was pregnant?" "No, I'm an only child," Thomas replied. "My father remarried after my mom died, but his wife is in her 60s. "And your mother's side of the family?" "Just a few distant cousins I barely know. No one who would have left a baby for me to find." Ms. Wilson made some notes in her file. "Well, Mr. Hayes, once the baby is released from medical care, we'll place her with one of our emergency foster families while the investigation continues. If her parents aren't located within a specific time frame, she'll become eligible for adoption." Thomas felt an unexpected pang at those words. The thought of the baby disappearing into the system bothered him deeply. "What if—" he started, then paused, surprised by what he was about to suggest. "What if I wanted to provide temporary care for her, just until her family is found?" Both Officer Reyes and Ms. Wilson looked at him with surprise. "Mr. Hayes, that's a significant responsibility," Ms. Wilson said carefully. and not a typical arrangement in these circumstances. I know it sounds strange, Thomas admitted, but someone left her at my mother's grave with a note saying she belongs with us. Maybe there's a reason for that. Something we don't understand yet. There would be a thorough background check, home inspections, emergency foster parent training, Ms. Wilson warned. It's not a simple process. I understand, Thomas said, more certain with each passing moment. But I can't explain it, I just feel responsible for her somehow. Before Ms. Wilson could respond, Officer Reyes's phone rang. She stepped away to answer it, her expression changing as she listened to the caller. "We've got something," she said when she returned. "Security footage from the cemetery entrance shows a woman entering 3 days ago around 5 a.m. She was carrying what appears to be a bundle consistent with an infant." "Did you get a clear image of her face?" Thomas asked eagerly. Officer Reyes shook her head. "No. She kept her face down and was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, but..." She hesitated. "She was driving a blue sedan registered to your mother." Thomas felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. "That's impossible. My mother's car was sold after she died. The dealer resold it to someone in another state." "Are you certain?" Officer Reyes pressed. "The license plate is only partially visible in the footage, but the first 3 characters match your mother's old plate." Thomas pulled out his phone with shaking hands, scrolling through old photos until he found one of his mother standing beside her car, a light blue Toyota Camry. This was her car. We sold it to Mountain View Auto 3 years ago, right after she passed. Officer Reyes took his phone, studying the image. "I'll check with the DMV and the dealership, see if we can track who purchased it." As she stepped away to make calls, Thomas sat back, his mind racing. Someone driving his mother's old car had left a newborn baby at her grave, with a note claiming the child belonged with their family. None of it made sense. Yet somehow, it all felt connected to his mother, to her life as a nurse, to the countless lives she had touched. Ms. Wilson was watching him with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Hayes, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." Thomas nodded, still distracted by the revelation about the car. "Why do you really want to take temporary custody of this baby? Is it curiosity about the mystery? Guilt because she was left at your mother's grave, or something else?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "But when I found her this morning, when I held her and she gripped my finger, I just felt like I was supposed to protect her, like my mom would have wanted me to keep her safe until we figure this out." Ms. Wilson studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "I'll start the paperwork for emergency foster placement evaluation. But Mr. Hayes, Thomas, please understand this is still very preliminary. The baby's biological family takes priority if they can be located." "I understand," Thomas said quietly. "I just want what's best for her." As Ms. Wilson left to make arrangements, Thomas found himself walking back toward the NICU viewing window. Through the glass, he could see the tiny baby, now awake, her little arms waving as a nurse fed her from a bottle. "Who are you?" he whispered to the glass. "And why did someone leave you for me to find?" 2 days later, Thomas stood in the doorway of his spare bedroom, surveying the chaos. A crib that had taken him 3 hours to assemble dominated the center of the room. Packages were scattered across the floor. Diapers, baby clothes, bottles, formula, and various items he'd never known existed before his crash course in baby care. He checked his watch. The social worker would arrive in less than an hour to conduct the final home inspection, before deciding whether to approve his emergency foster placement application. "This is crazy," he muttered to himself, picking up packaging to throw away. "Completely crazy." His phone rang and he saw it was Officer Reyes calling. "Hello?" he answered, wedging the phone between his ear and shoulder as he continued tidying up. "Mr. Hayes, we've tracked down information about your mother's car," Officer Reyes said without preamble. "It was purchased from Mountain View Auto by a woman named Diane Porter approximately 2.5 years ago." Thomas frowned. "The name doesn't sound familiar. Did you speak with her?" "That's the thing," Officer Reyes said, hesitation in her voice. "Ms. Porter died 6 months ago from cancer. According to her brother who handled her estate, the car was sold to a private buyer. He didn't keep records of who purchased it." Thomas sighed. Another dead end. So we still don't know who was driving it that morning. Not yet. But we found something else interesting. The partial fingerprint on the note. We got a hit from a hospital employment database. It belongs to a nursing assistant named Grace Winters. Thomas froze. Winters? Like Lisa Winters, the woman you mentioned before? Exactly. Lisa and Grace Winters were sisters. Grace worked at Mercy General in the maternity ward about 4 years ago. Thomas's mind raced. The same hospital where my mother worked. Yes. We're trying to locate Grace now for questioning, but she no longer works at the hospital. Her last known address is vacant and her phone is disconnected. Thomas sat down on the edge of his bed processing this new information. So, this Grace person might have known my mother from the hospital, and her sister's fingerprint somehow ended up on the note left with the baby? It's possible, though we don't understand the connection yet, Officer Reyes admitted. We're following every lead. After they hung up, Thomas went to his closet and pulled out a dusty box he'd been avoiding. Inside were his mother's personal effects from the hospital, her ID badge, a few framed photos, notebooks, and a small collection of cards from grateful patients. He'd packed it all away after the funeral, too painful to look through at the time. Now he carefully opened one of the notebooks. His mother had kept journals for years, documenting her thoughts and experiences as a nurse. He'd never read them, feeling it would somehow be an invasion of her privacy. The journal from 4 years ago was filled with his mother's neat handwriting, detailing difficult births, funny stories about new parents, and occasional frustrations with hospital administration. Thomas skimmed through looking for any mention of Grace or Lisa Winters. Nearly halfway through the journal, a name caught his eye. Grace W. started in maternity today. Seems nervous but eager to learn. Reminds me of myself when I first started, all heart, still developing the skills. Her sister just had a baby, so she's especially interested in newborn care. Thomas read on, finding occasional mentions of Grace over the next few months. His mother seemed to have taken a mentoring role with the young nursing assistant. Then, about 3 months later, he found a troubling entry. Difficult situation with Grace today. Found her crying in the supply closet. Her sister Lisa is in a bad relationship, afraid for herself and the baby. Grace wanted my advice. Gave her some resources, phone numbers for women's shelters. Worried about her, she's taking on a lot of responsibility for her sister's situation. Thomas flipped through more pages, finding another entry a few weeks later. Grace didn't show up for her shift yesterday. Called her apartment, no answer. Hospital is initiating termination procedures, but I'm worried. This isn't like her. There were no further mentions of Grace in that journal. Thomas quickly checked the next one but found nothing. He was about to give up when he noticed a folded piece of paper tucked into the back cover of the last journal. Opening it, he found a handwritten note. Margaret, thank you for everything. I'm sorry to leave without saying goodbye, but Lisa needs me. Maybe someday I can explain. You taught me more than nursing skills. You showed me what it means to truly care for others. I'll never forget that. Grace. Thomas stared at the note, then quickly took a photo and sent it to Officer Reyes with a brief explanation of what he'd found. His doorbell rang just as he finished texting. He hurried to answer it, finding Vanessa Wilson from Childy. Protective Services standing on his porch, clipboard in hand. Mr. Hayes, she greeted him with a professional smile. Ready for your home inspection? Thomas nodded, leading her inside. As ready as I'll ever be. Ms. Wilson was thorough, checking every room for safety hazards, inspecting the nursery setup, examining the food in his refrigerator, and asking detailed questions about his work schedule and childcare plans. I've arranged to take family leave for the first month, Thomas explained as they sat at his kitchen table. After that, my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez will help with childcare. She raised 5 children of her own and has 3 grandchildren she watches regularly. Ms. Wilson made notes. And you understand this is a temporary placement? The goal is always family reunification when possible. Yes, Thomas said, though the thought caused an unexpected pang in his chest. I just want to keep her safe until her family is found. Speaking of which, Ms. Wilson said, consulting her papers, we need to discuss what to call her. Right now she's just baby dough in the system. Thomas hadn't considered this. I don't know. Shouldn't her parents name her? Eventually, yes. But for now, she needs something more personal than a case number. Thomas thought about it. What about Hope? It seems fitting. Ms. Wilson smiled, the first genuine one he'd seen from her. Hope is perfect. She made a note in her file. One last question, Mr. Hayes, and I need complete honesty. Why are you doing this? Most single men with no child care experience don't volunteer to foster an abandoned newborn. Thomas considered his answer carefully. My mother dedicated her life to helping others, especially children. When I found that baby at her grave, with that note saying she belonged with us, it felt like my mom was asking me to step up, to continue what she would have done. He paused. I know it sounds strange, but it felt like the right thing to do. Ms. Wilson studied him for a long moment, then closed her folder. Well, your background check is clean, your home is suitable with the modifications you've made, and you seem to have thought through the practical challenges. I'll be recommending approval of your emergency foster placement. Relief washed over Thomas. When can I bring her home? The doctor says she'll be ready for discharge tomorrow morning. I'll meet you at the hospital at 9 a.m. with the final paperwork. After Ms. Wilson left, Thomas's phone chimed with a text from Officer Reyes. This is significant evidence. Can I stop by to collect the original note? Thomas replied affirmatively, then wandered into the nursery again. Just yesterday, this had been a dusty spare room filled with boxes. Now, it was ready for a baby, for Hope. His phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Chen from the hospital. Mr. Hayes? I wanted to let you know that the DNA results came back. You are not biologically related to the baby. Though he'd expected this, Thomas felt oddly disappointed. I see. Thank you for letting me know. There's something else, Dr. Chen continued. We ran her DNA through the medical database as standard procedure, looking for any genetic conditions we should be aware of. And? Thomas prompted when she paused. We found a partial match. A woman who was treated here for cancer 2 years ago shares enough genetic markers to suggest she was likely the baby's grandmother or aunt. Thomas's heart raced. What was her name? Due to privacy laws, I can't disclose that. But I've shared this information with the police and CPS. After hanging up, Thomas stood in the middle of the nursery, his mind connecting dots. A woman with cancer 2 years ago who might be related to the baby. Could it be Diane Porter, who'd bought his mother's car? Or perhaps Lisa Winters, Grace's sister, who had reportedly died? The doorbell rang again. Officer Reyes stood on the porch with another officer. We found Grace Winters, she said as soon as Thomas opened the door. She's living in a small town about 3 hours from here. We've spoken to her by phone and she's agreed to come in for questioning tomorrow. Did she admit to leaving the baby? Thomas asked. Officer Reyes shook her head. She wouldn't discuss that over the phone, but she did ask if the baby was safe and healthy. Thomas handed over his mother's journal and the original note from Grace. There's more. The hospital found a partial DNA match to someone treated for cancer 2 years ago, possibly the baby's grandmother or aunt. Officer Reyes's eyes widened slightly. Lisa Winters reportedly died 2 years ago from injuries in a car accident, but we haven't been able to confirm that death with a certificate yet. And Diane Porter, who bought my mom's car, died from cancer 6 months ago, Thomas added. This case keeps getting more complicated, Officer Reyes muttered, carefully placing the note in an evidence bag. We'll know more after speaking with Grace tomorrow. After the officers left, Thomas's phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Is she safe? Please tell me she's safe. Thomas stared at the message, unsure how to respond or who had sent it. Before he could decide, another text came through. This is Grace. The police gave me your number. I need to know she's okay before I come in tomorrow. Thomas's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Finally, he typed, She's safe. Her name is Hope now. Why did you leave her at my mother's grave? The reply came almost instantly. Because Margaret Hayes was the only person who ever truly helped us. And I promised Lisa her baby would be safe with someone who would love her. Thomas stared at the message for a long time. Tomorrow he would hopefully get answers to the questions that had been haunting him. Tomorrow he would bring Hope home, and somehow he felt certain his mother had been guiding these events all along. Thomas paced the hospital corridor, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. It was 8:45 a.m. Ms. Wilson from Child Protective Services would arrive soon with the final paperwork, and then he could take Hope home. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. A text message alert sounded from his phone. Meeting with Grace Winters scheduled for 2 p.m. at the police station. You're welcome to attend if you wish. Officer Reyes. Thomas quickly replied that he would be there. He needed answers. Needed to understand why this woman had left a newborn baby at his mother's grave. The elevator doors opened, and Ms. Wilson stepped out, briefcase in hand. She smiled when she saw him. You're early, she noted, checking her own watch. Couldn't sleep, Thomas admitted. Too nervous. Ms. Wilson nodded understandingly. That's normal. The first day is always the most overwhelming. She handed him a thick folder. Here's all the information you'll need. Emergency contacts, follow-up appointment schedules, guidelines for foster parents, and the temporary custody paperwork. Thomas flipped through the documents, his eyes widening at the sheer volume of information. This is a lot. It is, Ms. Wilson agreed. But remember, you're not alone in this. My number is on the first page. Call any time, day or night, if you have questions or concerns. They walked together to the nursery where a nurse was preparing Hope for discharge. When Thomas entered, she looked up with a smile. Someone's all ready to go home, the nurse said, gesturing to the baby who was now dressed in a simple white onesie and wrapped in a soft pink blanket. Items Thomas had brought from his newly prepared nursery the day before. Thomas approached slowly, still amazed at how tiny Hope was. Her eyes were open, dark blue and seemingly alert as they fixed on him. Hi there, he said softly. Ready to come home with me? The nurse gently transferred Hope into his arms, helping him position her head properly in the crook of his elbow. Support her neck, that's it. You're a natural. Thomas didn't feel natural at all. He felt awkward and terrified, certain he was holding her wrong despite the nurse's reassurance. But Hope didn't seem to mind. She blinked up at him, one tiny hand escaping the blanket to wave in the air. Oh. The nurse reached for a bag on the counter. Dr. Chen asked me to give you this. It's the yellow blanket she was found in. It's been cleaned. Thomas took the blanket with his free hand, noticing it was worn thin in places, obviously well used. Thank you. I want to keep everything that might help piece together her story. After signing what felt like a mountain of forms, listening to last-minute care instructions, and being reminded of Hope's follow-up appointment in 3 days, Thomas finally found himself walking out of the hospital, carrying a newborn baby in a diaper bag. The drive home was nerve-wracking. He checked the rear-view mirror constantly, making sure the car seat was still securely fastened, that Hope wasn't choking or in distress. Every red light felt agonizingly long, every other driver a potential threat. When they finally arrived home, Thomas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. We made it, he told Hope, who had fallen asleep during the drive. First challenge complete. He carefully unclipped the car seat and carried it inside, setting it gently on the living room floor. Hope continued to sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Thomas sank onto the couch, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of his situation. He was now responsible for a human life. This small, helpless being depended entirely on him. What have I gotten myself into? He whispered, running a hand through his hair. As if in response, Hope's face scrunched up and she let out a small whimper that quickly escalated into a full cry. Thomas jumped up, frantically trying to remember what the nurse had told him about soothing techniques. Hungry? Diaper, just unhappy? He asked aloud, carefully lifting her from the car seat. The diaper felt dry when he checked, and she had been fed just before leaving the hospital. Okay, let's try walking. He paced the living room, gently bouncing, Hope and making soft shushing sounds. Gradually, her cries subsided and she settled against his chest, one ear pressed to his heart. That's it, he murmured. You're okay. We're both okay. The next few hours passed in a blur of feeding, changing, and soothing. By the time Thomas needed to leave for the meeting with Grace Winters, he was exhausted but strangely exhilarated. Each small success, a successful feeding, a diaper change without tears, from either of them, a peaceful nap, felt like a major accomplishment. Mrs. Rodriguez, his elderly neighbor who had agreed to help with childcare, arrived promptly at 1:30 p.m. "Oh, let me see this little angel," she cooed, peering at Hope, who was sleeping in the bassinet Thomas had set up in the living room. "She's beautiful. Thank you for doing this," Thomas said gratefully. "I shouldn't be gone more than a couple of hours." Mrs. Rodriguez waved away his thanks. "It's my pleasure. Babies are a blessing even when they come to us in unusual ways." She shooed him toward the door. "Go get your answers. We'll be fine here." The police station was bustling when Thomas arrived. Officer Reyes met him in the lobby. "Grace Winters arrived about 20 minutes ago," she informed him. "She's with her lawyer now. She's agreed to speak with you privately before giving her official statement." Thomas frowned. "Her lawyer? Is she being charged with something?" "Abandoning a newborn can be a criminal offense," Officer Reyes explained. "But depending on the circumstances and her cooperation, the district attorney may consider leniency." She led Thomas to a small conference room where two women waited. One was clearly an attorney, professionally dressed with a briefcase open on the table. The other was younger, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark circles under her eyes and hands that trembled slightly as she clasped them together on the table. "Mr. Hayes," the attorney greeted him. "I'm Stephanie Lawson, representing Ms. Winters. Thank you for agreeing to this conversation before formal proceedings begin." Thomas barely heard her, his attention fixed on Grace Winters. This was the woman who had left a newborn baby at his mother's grave, who had somehow known his mother well enough to believe her family would care for an abandoned child. "Why?" he asked simply, sitting down across from her. Grace glanced at her lawyer, who nodded encouragingly. "I promised my sister I would make sure her baby was safe," Grace said, her voice soft but steady. "Margaret, your mother, was the only person who ever truly helped us when no one else would. My sister Lisa," Grace continued, "was in an abusive relationship with a powerful man. When she got pregnant, she tried to leave him, but he threatened to take the baby and make sure Lisa never saw her again. He had money, connections. He could have done it." Thomas tried to process this information. "But I was told Lisa died 2 years ago." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "That's what we wanted everyone to believe. Your mother helped us fake Lisa's death after a car accident. The woman who actually died was already deceased, a Jane Doe in the morgue with similar physical characteristics. Your mother helped make sure the dental records would match enough to pass a cursory examination." Thomas sat back, stunned. "My mother helped fake someone's death? That's illegal. She could have lost her nursing license, gone to jail. She knew the risks," Grace said. "But she also knew what would happen to Lisa and her unborn child if she didn't help. The man Lisa was involved with, he'd already put her in the hospital twice. The second time, your mother was her nurse. She saw the fear in Lisa's eyes, recognized the signs of ongoing abuse that Lisa tried to hide. So my mother helped Lisa disappear," Thomas said slowly. "Where did she go?" "To a small town in Canada. Margaret had connections there. A cousin, who owned a small cabin in the woods. Lisa lived there under a different name, safe from him. I would visit when I could. For 2 years it worked. Lisa was building a new life." "Then what happened?" Thomas asked, though he was beginning to piece it together. Grace's composure finally broke, tears streaming down her face. "Cancer, the same kind that killed our mother when we were teenagers. It was advanced by the time they caught it. Lisa refused treatment that might harm the baby. She held on just long enough to give birth." Thomas felt his own eyes burning. "And her last wish was for you to bring the baby to my mother," Grace nodded. "But when I got here, I learned Margaret had passed away 3 years ago. I was devastated, lost. I didn't know what to do. Then I remembered the cemetery where she was buried. You had sent a notice to the hospital when she died. So you left. The baby at her grave, Thomas said, his voice barely audible. I watched from a distance, Grace admitted. I knew you visited regularly. The groundskeeper mentioned it once when I came to leave flowers on Margaret's birthday last year. I hoped you would find her. But why leave her for 3 days? She could have died out there, Thomas said, unable to keep the accusation from his voice. Grace flinched. I didn't plan to leave her that long. I watched the first day, but you didn't come. I had to leave to get more formula, more diapers. When I came back, there was a police car nearby. I got scared, thought they might be looking for me. I kept driving by, waiting for a chance to check on her, but there was always someone around. You could have taken her to a hospital, a fire station, Thomas pointed out. I promised Lisa her baby would go to Margaret's family, Grace said firmly. I was desperate, not thinking clearly. By the 3rd day, I was about to give up and take her to the hospital myself when I saw your car pull into the cemetery. I waited until I saw you find her before I left. The attorney interjected gently. Mr. Hayes, my client understands the seriousness of her actions. She's prepared to accept the legal consequences. But she wants to know, is the baby truly safe with you? Thomas thought about Hope, sleeping peacefully in his home under Mrs. Rodriguez's watchful eye. Yes, he said. Her name is Hope now, and yes, she's safe. Relief washed over Grace's face. Thank you, she whispered. Lisa would be grateful. Officer. Reyes, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. We'll need a formal statement now, Ms. Winters, and we'll need to verify your sister's identity and death. I have Lisa's personal effects, Grace said. And her ashes. She wanted them scattered at the lake where we used to vacation as children. I haven't been able to do that yet. Thomas stood, his emotions too complex to name. I should get back. To Hope. As he turned to leave, Grace called after him. Mr. Hayes, there's a letter. From Lisa to Margaret's family. It's in the lining of the yellow blanket. We sewed it in to make sure it wouldn't get lost. Thomas nodded silently and left the room. Outside in the hallway, he leaned against the wall, trying to process everything he'd learned. His mother, the rule follower, the respected nurse, had broken the law to protect a young woman and her unborn child. She had kept secrets he'd never suspected. Are you all right? Officer Reyes asked, following him out. I don't know, Thomas answered honestly. I need to get home to Hope. We'll be in touch about the case, she said. For what it's worth, the day will take all these circumstances into consideration. When Thomas arrived home, Mrs. Rodriguez met him at the door with a finger to her lips. She just fell asleep, she whispered. Thomas thanked her, and once she had left, went to check on Hope. She slept soundly in her bassinet, one tiny hand curled against her cheek. Carefully, he retrieved the yellow blanket from where he'd placed it on the changing table. Running his fingers along the edge, he felt a slight stiffness in the hem. Using a small pair of scissors, he carefully snipped a few stitches and extracted a folded piece of paper that had been hidden inside. With trembling hands, he unfolded the letter from a dying mother to strangers she had hoped would save her child. Thomas sat in the rocking chair beside Hope's crib, the unfolded letter trembling in his hands. The handwriting was shaky but determined, as if each word had been written with great effort. To the family of Margaret Hayes. My name is Lisa Winters. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and my sister Grace has fulfilled her promise to bring my daughter to the only person I ever truly trusted, Margaret. I don't know who will find this letter, perhaps Margaret herself or someone she loves. Either way, I'm entrusting you with my most precious gift, my baby girl. Margaret saved my life 3 years ago. She saw the bruises I tried to hide, asked the questions no one else dared to ask, and offered help when I had nowhere to turn. When David threatened to kill me and take my unborn child, Margaret risked everything to help me disappear. I can never repay that kindness. I don't have the right to ask anything more of your family, but I'm desperate and dying. My daughter deserves a chance at life, a real life, with love and safety. something I couldn't give her in the end. If you're reading this and don't want this responsibility, I understand. Please take her to someone who will love her, but if there's any way you can keep her, know that she is the best of me, untouched by the darkness that followed me for so long. Her name is Joy, because that's what she brought me in my final months. Her birthday is April 17th. She likes to be rocked while humming. Any tune will do. She's strong, like her Aunt Grace, and I hope she'll be kind, like Margaret. With eternal gratitude and hope. Lisa Winters. Thomas lowered the letter, tears blurring his vision. In the crib, Hope, or Joy as her mother had named her, slept peacefully, unaware of the weight of her story or the choices that had brought her here. 6 months had passed since that morning at the cemetery. 6 months of middle of the night. Feedings, first smiles, tiny fingers gripping his with surprising strength. 6 months of learning to be a parent to a child who had come into his life through tragedy and hope. The legal proceedings had been complicated. Grace had faced charges for child abandonment, but given the extraordinary circumstances, she'd received a suspended sentence and community service. She'd provided DNA samples, birth records, and Lisa's death certificate to confirm Joy's identity. Thomas had formally applied to adopt Joy, a process still working its way through the system. The social worker visits had become less frequent, Ms. Wilson's initial skepticism replaced by approval as she witnessed the bond growing between Thomas and the baby. His phone chimed with a text message. It was Grace, sending her weekly check-in. "How's our girl today? Still enjoying those musical toys?" Thomas smiled, typing back, "She's great. Just discovered she can roll from her back to her stomach. Seems very proud of herself." Grace had become a regular presence in their lives. Aunt Grace, who visited on Sundays, bringing tiny outfits and taking hundreds of photos. Their relationship had been tentative at first, weighted by the circumstances of their meeting, but had gradually evolved into something like friendship, bound by their shared love for Joy. A soft whimper from the crib pulled Thomas's attention. Joy was awake, blinking up at the mobile of stars and moons that hung above her. When she saw Thomas, her face broke into a wide, gummy smile that still amazed him every time. "Hey there, sunshine," he said softly, lifting her into his arms. "Had a good nap?" Joy babbled in response, a stream of consonants that Thomas pretended to understand. "Is that right? Well, I completely agree." The doorbell rang and Thomas carried Joy with him to answer it. Officer Reyes, Mia, as she'd asked him to call her now that the case was officially closed, stood on the porch with a small gift bag. "Hope, I'm not interrupting," she said with a smile. "Just wanted to drop this off for the little one." "Perfect timing," Thomas replied, stepping back to let her in. She just woke up from her nap. Mia had become another unexpected addition to their growing circle. What had begun as professional follow-ups on the case had gradually shifted to personal visits. Thomas wasn't quite sure what to make of the way his heart raced when she smiled, but he was in no rush to define it. "Look at you getting so big," Mia cooed, holding out her hands. Joy went to her willingly, already familiar with her regular visitor. "I brought you something special." From the bag, Mia produced a small stuffed owl. "My grandmother used to say owls bring wisdom and protection," she explained, a bit self-consciously. "Thought she might like it." "It's perfect," Thomas assured her. "Coffee?" As Thomas moved to the kitchen, he heard his father's car pull into the driveway. Sunday dinner had become a tradition over the past few months, his father and stepmother joining them, along with Grace when she could make it, and occasionally Mia if she was off duty. These gatherings still felt surreal sometimes. A year ago, Thomas had been living alone, visiting his mother's grave monthly, going through the motions of a life that felt half empty since her death. Now his home was filled with baby gear, visitor schedules, and the constant miraculous presence of Joy. His father entered without knocking, carrying a covered dish. "Made my famous lasagna," he announced. "Where's my granddaughter?" "Living room, with Mia." Thomas replied, taking the dish. Dad, I found something I want to show you. Thomas led his father to the study and handed him Lisa's letter. He watched his father's expression change as he read. Surprise, then understanding, and finally a sad smile. Your mother never told me, he said quietly when he finished. But I'm not surprised. This was exactly who she was. Always helping, always caring. Consequences be damned. I wish I'd known this side of her, Thomas admitted. I always saw her as cautious by the book. His father shook his head. Margaret played by her own book. Rules came second to doing what was right. He carefully refolded the letter. She would be so proud of you, Thomas, for finding Joy, for giving her a home. The doorbell rang again, Grace arriving with a baby photo album she'd been putting together. Soon the house was filled with conversation and laughter, Joy being passed from arms to arms, soaking up the attention. During a quiet moment, Thomas slipped away to the nursery, taking a framed photo from the shelf. It showed his mother in her nursing scrubs, smiling broadly at the camera. He'd placed it where Joy could see it from her crib. She's doing great, Mom, he whispered to the photo. You would love her so much. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Grace stood in the doorway, her expression solemn. I never properly thanked you, she said quietly, for taking her in, for giving her a family. She brought me a family, Thomas corrected gently. Before Joy, I was just going through the motions. Now. He gestured to the sounds of conversation and laughter drifting from the living room. Grace nodded, understanding. Lisa would be at peace knowing this. It's more than we dared hope for. I've been thinking, Thomas said. When the adoption is finalized, I'd like to make her full name Joy Margaret Winters Hayes, to honor both her mother and mine. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Lisa would love that. There's something else, Thomas continued. I'd like you to be her legal guardian if anything ever happens to me. You're her family too. Grace seemed unable to speak, simply nodding as tears spilled down her cheeks. From the living room, Mia called out, Thomas, your father's telling that embarrassing story about your 6th grade science fair again. Thomas laughed. We'd better get back out there. As they rejoined the others, Thomas watched his father bouncing Joy on his knee, his stepmother taking photos, Mia laughing at whatever story was being told. This mismatched group of people, brought together by extraordinary circumstances, had become something he'd never expected. A family. Later that evening, after everyone had gone and Joy was asleep, Thomas sat on his back porch looking at the stars. He thought about the chain of events that had led him here. His mother's secret act of kindness years ago, Grace's desperate decision at the cemetery, his own choice to take in an abandoned newborn. 1 year ago, he had stood at his mother's grave feeling alone in the world. Now, because of that same grave, he would never be alone again. In 3 days, it would be time for his monthly visit to the cemetery. But this time, he wouldn't go alone. He would take Joy to meet her grandmother, to place flowers on the grave of the woman whose compassion had set everything in motion. Thomas smiled at the thought of introducing his daughter to his mother. He would tell Joy the story, the whole incredible story when she was old enough to understand. How someone left a newborn baby on his late mother's grave for 3 days. How that baby had been waiting for him, sent by a woman he'd never met, guided by his mother's legacy of kindness. How sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected ways, and how love can reach beyond death to create new beginnings. In her crib, Joy stirred and made a small sound. Thomas went to her, lifting her gently when she reached for him. Holding her against his chest, her heartbeat steady against his own, he whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Outside, the stars continued their silent watch over the small house where a family had been born from grief and hope, guided by the invisible hand of a woman who had taught her son, through her final gift, what it truly meant to love.